Great.
We're now recording. Welcome everyone to our chaos value working group on April 9. Please find the minutes in the chat, the document. And please do help us keep up to date with what we're talking about and add yourself to the list of attendees. Let us know how you're feeling today. I'm personally super excited because now I have fish in my aquarium. I went out to buy 5 fish yesterday and they already have all names.
But can you tell them apart yet?
Yes. Well,
I'm very
so there are
impressed.
2 that are very similar and they're just clones of the same person from different timelines.
That's brilliant. That's a good metric, or a good way to.
Could somebody share their screen really fast, just so I can test to see if it holds gallery view when the recording comes through? You could turn it off right after, but
I have, do you see the live, what the recording looks like?
no, but once it's done, I'll take a look at it. It's just a test. I'll see.
I just looked at it. There are 2 options under local recording that don't exist under cloud recording. I don't know where you're recording these to, Matt.
It's cloud, but let's just, I think I got it, but you can turn off your screen share. But yeah, there were some web things that you're talking about, Sean, that I saw.
Yeah, I didn't see the same options under web as I did under local, so we can move on to the agenda.
Okay, I got it. Thank you.
So one of the things we talked about last time was that we wanted to talk to Lawrence Hecht, and thank you, Lawrence, for joining us. And if I remember correctly, the reason why was because we were talking about the survey that Vinod was doing and some other ideas around connecting the work that we're doing more with the work that the to-do group is doing, and maybe getting some insights to what metrics are used in budgeting decisions. And there's a whole can of worms to unpack. So that's definitely something I look forward to talking about today. There were other things we wanted to talk about today as well, but the agenda items, I didn't put them on there, so maybe someone else.
Yeah, I did. All good. I just wanted to continue with the momentum we started with last meeting on looking into how we evaluate the pre-existing metrics in the context of the new mission. A couple of contributors have mentioned the importance of focus groups as a methodology to understanding where to hone and how to clarify metrics. So I wrote a proposal this week I wanted to touch base on, and then we can continue on the further metric review. There's a pull request for SCMS to come back in with some additional details. And then there's a couple other issues I've opened up, and just a note on, like, I'm gonna make a call for people in DevRel and OSPOS to participate in this group. I've got like a draft of an article and some outreach through the DevRel collective started. So I'm hoping, I wanted to touch base with all of you first and then start to kick that off to try to pull in some more participants. But we can get to that. Let's start with this awesome group review. So Greg, would you mind continuing with, so the to-do group survey work and then connecting Lawrence to that? I'm not actually sure how that will flow.
So I would suggest having 2 introductions here. One is Lawrence introduce himself and the work he's doing, and then Vinod introduces the work that he is doing, because I think those are the 2 main connection points, and then I think everything else will flow from there. So Lawrence, if you would like to introduce yourself.
I am unmuted. So I've known about you guys since the beginning. I attended a couple of the first meetings about a year and a half ago, and then I was overwhelmed with everyone who had more stakes in the game. Basically, I wasn't getting paid to go to the meetings, didn't have any budget, so I stopped coming. But basically, I worked on 2 surveys last year, and I plan to work on, and I have 1 survey in the queue, and another survey I am waiting for financing on, which I'm probably going to get. So generally speaking, we're working on a to-do group survey. So the to-do group's open source program office group. And that survey has focused on why people are starting open source programs, the value they're getting. And then we tacked on about 10 to 12 other questions about developer velocity, different licensing questions, things that are related to open source, but not directly related to the performance of open source programs. So that's the one where we'll be doing a 3rd year of the survey. The interesting thing there is that in addition to the open source program to-do group, we're also getting financing from VMware. And basically all VMware wants is to ask one question about people who are the value people ascribe to different companies as open source citizens. So in other words, is VMware a good open source citizen? Yes, like, and then rate
Net
that.
promoter
and
score.
basically, I mean, basically the gist of it is and then we basically have a large list of companies. So basically it's people take it seriously. So we reported on VMware had bad data. So we reported on that. And they said, okay, we hope to do better. We have a program in place to do better. So that's that. The other project I worked on was with TideLift. And we looked at a lot of different metrics in terms of why people are picking certain projects. What are the incentives for people to work on open source? How many hours are they spending? How many hours are they spending where they're getting paid? What's the price point that they would where they would actually add more time? Things like that. And that's the question that I plan. That's that type of survey we're planning to do something again with. That's where I'm trying to get the financing finalized. But this year it'll be less. Last year was some of it was trying to help them with their positioning. This time there was going to be much more just broad topics. The third thing to say that, and finally, when I created that survey, I added a question based off of what the CHAOSS group was doing. So basically, the conclusion that's relevant to you guys was that people looked at open source projects as being current as long as someone's made a contribution within the last 3 months. If it's been active in the last 3 months, then people are willing to use the project. After that, they become very skeptical. That's the tipping point.
So they have the attention span of a quarterly report, effectively.
Basically, yeah. And then lastly, things you should know is that I don't know if anyone's been talking to the people from Harvard. You know, Harvard Linux Foundation did a survey, announced a study a few months ago. But so basically, Harvard was supposed to launch a survey in March. They haven't done it, but they were supposed to be launching a survey, a very detailed survey about open source development. And the gist of that is, but they haven't shared the questions with me. I offered to review them beforehand. And it's a little touchy because Linux Foundation rejected my proposal a year and a half to do that work. So I'm not trying to fight with them too much, but basically that's supposed to be the next step from it was a 2017 survey that GitHub did. they were looking at that and looking at all the Black Duck surveys, and they were trying to create a new annual survey that was going to be a benchmark. Okay, that's me. Vinod, you're up.
Yeah. Thank you, Lawrence, for the detailed discussion on all these different surveys you have been doing. So what I did was more focused. It's a very focused. The target was CIOs or CTOs, whoever like decision powers, and the companies who are investing in open source. So what we did is we picked the companies which are kind of sponsoring Linux Foundation. We picked their companies, find out the details of the CTOs and CIOs, and approach them to get their idea like how they value open source. What is the value they drive, like whether in terms of financial or in terms of non-financial, like for the product development, for generating revenue or finding the employees. So it was very specific to the CIOs or CTOs who are a decision maker and wanted to know how they value the open source or what value they drive from the open source. So we sent it out to the response was very low. We sent it out to almost 500 people, but so far we got a 15 responses on that. But those were all from CIOs and CTOs.
When?
So we launched it in January and concluded it in the end of March.
Can you share some of the questions, Vinod?
Yes. Let me share my screen. Can you see the survey?
We can. Thank you.
I can, yeah.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so first was on the having the consent to participate, and second is more on the just demographic role and use of open source in their product or services. Like that was the main criteria, whether are they companies using the open source or not. Then we asked them the size of company, their like how many employees they have to gauge the size of the company, and their reach, like whether it's more on a local basis, on a regional or national or international level, and how long this company has been in the business, and when did the company start using open source in their product and services. And then we asked them what best describe the company usage of open source and proprietary software, whether it's like 100% proprietary, a mix of open source and proprietary, or purely 100% open source oriented. Then we have who are the primary customer of the open source related products. Are these individuals, small companies, large corporations, just to get an idea about their target customers. And then we depth into the more specific investment. How does your company invest does your company invest any resources, financial or non-financial, in the development, support or promotion of open source? And then what is your company's reason for investing? So we wanted to know why they are investing in open source. Are they just a business strategy for the product development, or low cost of investment, or regulatory requirement, or marketing promotion, or just recruiting, various reasons. And then how does company invest in open source? What are the different ways they are investing? It's just dedicating employees, just funding an open source project, or starting a new open source software and developing a community. So finding out the ways in which those companies are investing in open source. Just providing logistic, even some companies were just providing the web hosting services to the open source projects. So in different ways, companies are supporting open source. So I was trying to gauge what are the different ways these companies are investing. And then how does organization dedicate employees? Are you just dedicating full-time, part-time, ad hoc, or needed? How these companies were. So these are linked questions. So if they selected they are dedicating employees, then they'll see this question, okay, like, oh yes, how, and then we were trying to gauge how they are dedicating the employees. And similarly, we have how does company calculate the cost of investment in open source. So if they are investing employees or if they are investing any resources, how they are calculating. And most of the from the 15 response I got is most of them was like never calculated the cost of investment in open source. One or two said like, okay, we are dedicating employees, so we are just calculating their salary as a investment in the open source cost of investment. But majority of them have never calculated. So then what is the percentage of total investment in business activity related to open source product? So it's just a percentage measure. It was more of a mix. Then for the development of product or services, approximately how many open source projects does your company engage with? Are you like engaged with one project, 1 to 5? There's a range of it. Mostly were in the range of 6 to 10 projects. And then for the development of product or services, approximately how many open source communities does your company maintain? So mostly were in the range of 1 to 5. So 2 or 3 communities were mostly. And then we have like how does your company benefit from investing in open source? It's reduced cost, generation of new ideas, improved distribution, usage of software, or improved company image. Just because of the many companies are also investing because of the marketing. Like, okay, we have a branding our image and things like this. Then we focus on the cost, like how does your company calculate cost using the open source, estimating the salary cost, company comparing in-house development versus open source development, comparing purchase of proprietary software versus open source development cost. So these are the different options. And then we had an open-ended option, like if you're doing something else, what are the other areas you're looking at? Then we looked at, okay, how you are generating revenue, either by directly selling open source related products, doing the installation, support, or providing subscription or cloud-based services, and many and open-ended answer also. And then we had what are the major source of revenue for the company with respect to investment in open source, either sales of services around open source, sale of proprietary, sale of hardware around open source software, and what percentage of total business revenue is generated through open source software. Then we asked them, did you calculate the return on investment ROI? Either by calculating monetary return, counting the number of people hired. But majority of the response was they never calculated ROI on the investment in open source. So, and one question was on the risk. Do you face any risk factors like risk of licensing lawsuit, risk of unpublished security vulnerabilities because of using open source software, or risk of slow or low software support and accidental release? And then we asked, like, in the end, we asked open-ended question, do you use any metrics to measure the value gain from open source? If yes, then we asked them, okay, mention top 3 metrics you use, and then any other feedback you provide. So that was all like a detailed survey we sent out to the company.
Vinod, why did you create the survey, and for what organization? For yourself?
Yeah, it was an academic research project.
And do you plan to do follow-up?
So we are thinking of like maybe extending it somehow because the response rate was very low.
So I can.
I would go on.
Go
Sorry.
ahead. No, you go ahead. You're a survey expert, Brent Lawrence.
We cannot hear you. Sorry.
I think you're
My
muted.
suggestion is to go through everything and figure out which questions you really liked and which ones you want to follow up on.
Okay.
And it might be better, and do you get the people's email addresses?
Yes.
What you could do is basically pre-populate the data from this into a new survey and just send an email to people saying, hey, could you check, can you give us, ask if anything's changed. That's one way to look at it. Or basically, but my main thing is for you to figure out which questions are best, and it might be better to just start over again instead of trying to get the fifth. And the other issue is maybe you're going too high up in the food chain because CIOs don't have any time. Yeah, you're never going to get a lot of CIOs to do a survey.
Sean, did you have a comment?
My comment is in some of those where you're asking for ranges, giving them a slider might make it easier to respond than having them search through checkboxes. I was just trying to think at the C level, what is the way it could be shortened or made to look like it's a faster survey to repeat. When I get a survey with a lot of selections on the page, I just kind of give up really fast.
Yeah. So total time I noted on this was like 10 to 12 minutes in the range of 10 to 12 minutes.
Fair. So maybe I'll take a step back and ask, like, what would be helpful right now for, like, what is our goal in reviewing this survey as is? Like, is it to get feedback and improve and iterate, or is it for background information? Just want to make sure I understand the outcome we're after.
So the goal was like we ran the survey and the response was low. So if we can have some collaboration or maybe some, like I would run as an individual, if we have some support from like some branding, we can tweak it and then rerun it to get a better response and idea on this.
Can I make a few comments here?
Yeah.
Please.
So Lawrence, to one of your first questions, this project is ultimately funded by the Alfred Sloan Foundation as kind of supporting the CHAOSS project as for the last 3 years. So one of the things that we're doing with this survey is trying to respond to one of the working groups that came out of CHAOSS, which was the value working group. And the whole determination of value, as I'm sure you're aware, it's kind of like a holy grail. It's really hard to get at, particularly in this open source space. So we've been asking questions around value for a long time. And as Vinod pointed out, a lot of the answers are, we don't calculate ROI. We invest in open source because it seems like a good idea. It helps us kind of get our developers out there. It helps us in the development of our product, but we don't calculate it. So the determination of value is critical and not well understood. So that's kind of the research component behind this. And so part of the challenges with research is we need to be able to clearly articulate the audience that is answering the survey. And we started with the C level simply because it was kind of a tight bounding of people that could be articulated well in a project, but naturally the response rates were low. So I think one of the things that we'd be interested in is trying to scale this this survey or parts of the survey, but also managing to be attentive to not just casting it out on, say, Twitter, where anybody can respond and then the results become kind of less valuable, right? So we were always trying to balance, as you know, with surveys, like just broadcasting the survey that anybody can take it versus narrow populations that may not have the time. So it's a trick, right? It's a balancing act. You're muted, Lawrence.
we used to run a panel. So I understand, and that was, instead of having just random people, we would phone call, pre-screen people, and have a full system like that. That was in another time. What I found is that if you have a good screening question, that takes care of most of it, of the problem. And what I do is I tag the surveys so I know what source it came from. So for example, in a different world, if I was asking about adoption of different products, I usually don't have a vendor promote it. But let's say if I did have a vendor send it to their list, I would have a note on it so I knew where it came from. So I wouldn't say, oh, Circle CI has really high adoption. Well, of course they have high adoption because a third of the survey are their customers. So basically I have controls for that type of system. Generally speaking, what's common is you get, it's not, what we used to also do is get vendor nominations. So for example, if we had a customer, we'd let the people, we'd survey up to 10 of their customers, but no more. So basically you get a lot of the good data about everyone else also, besides what they're talking about. So generally speaking is you just want to get a wide distribution, get in a bunch of newsletters to a lot of people. For example, if you were able to get Apache Foundation and Eclipse Foundation to put in their newsletters, that's great. And if you were able to get, and it's worth it to spend money for the broad audience, if you were able to get budget, basically the idea is that you can combine data from another source if you want, or give incentives of some sort. But
we have budget. So we did a random drawing of $1,000 gift card.
So that I would have done for 250, for example, more like just, I mean, but yeah, so the random drawing, that's good. The issue is, one of that is that everyone else doesn't know they actually get it. But generally speaking, it was just basically focusing on the high level. They have a low response rate. You just have to get in front of you have to get in front of 30,000 people. If you don't get in front of 30,000 people, you're not going to get a large response, because it's only going to be about, let's say 2-3% of people that see it might click on it. And out of that, it's only going to be like 25% of them that complete the survey. So think about it that way. I've had really high response rates on other surveys, but it's based off of you're looking for something specific, so that people, let's say doing open source program offices, people are interested in that. A lot people are really interested in that, so they have a reason to do the survey. Saying that asking about open source, that's a very general topic. There's not a lot of incentive. People aren't very interested in that. It seems so vague. I was doing two things. One is, I think that you guys, I'm going to show you two things real quick. Well, I was looking at your pull requests. Hold on. One was, going in here. Go to everyone. So that's, George shared that 2 days ago. If you go to the questions MD, that has the questions that I asked. And you'll note that one question we asked was, how valuable is the support and return on your investment you have received from these open source foundations? We asked you, is your company a member or a sponsor of an open source foundation, and what value did you get? So that was narrow. But what I also did was I was looking at things in terms of what are the ways you're quantifying your program office's success? What benefits are you getting? And then I was doing cross tabs of that versus how far along are they with open source? How many open source program projects are they maintaining? How much are you collaborating with other peers? Are you asked a bunch of questions there that are somewhat relevant. I'm going to show you another doc, and that's something else here. This is technically not public. I'm allowed to share it, but don't. It's not.
It'll be recorded if we if you show it.
But I'm not going to send it. So basically,
Okay, we are recording the meeting again.
Yeah, and all I was going to say was that, and here's a link to you get the full report at that link. And that's it's almost everything's publicly available. It's basically the same thing. It was just the one part. And that's where we're going to be looking for. They think they would be glad to see things work together. So let's if we take a step back for a second, what about if I'm in your repo for working group value, I guess my main question is, what types for this, for Vinod and everything else, is what metrics are important that you can't collect, that you need to collect via survey or focus group or whatever it is? That's the main question to have, because you rather have real quant data, based off of activities rather than just surveys. But have you thought about that question?
Yeah, so the main question for me is the determination of value, or the questions associated in that space. How is that done? Not just do you plan on paying people, not just do you make money on this, but how do you actually determine that value? You're muted.
For me, there's two things. One is, so I've looked at how you determine value of funding open source communities, and that's different than funding actual development and maintenance and use of open source. So you have to look at those two separate things. So the funding of open source communities has a lot to do with hiring and recruiting and maintaining developers. So that's how they're measuring value. And then in terms of everything I was showing you, we asked a question for the open source program office: how are you measuring the success? And that's basically what metrics are you using to measure success for the program office? So some of them are operational, but some of them have to do with license compliance, which is a big cost center. How do you measure innovation? I think that's ridiculous to try to measure innovation, but people are going to tell you that repeatedly. How is it related to revenue generation? People are measuring it. And again, that's impossible to measure. And you'll ask questions, you get answers, but there won't be good answers. So basically, it's how can the business leaders are going to be measuring value certain ways. The developers are measuring value certain ways. And you want to be able to capture both metrics. but and I have to go back. I have a list of 20 KPIs software engineering managers should use. So are you measuring value that way in terms of what the software engineering managers are? That's a very common approach that where I see people try to justify certain software use, in that there's going to be higher quality, less defects, less vulnerabilities. Those are all very much success metrics that that will convince people to do things.
So then also to Matt B, the question you had asked is why, why is this discussion occurring in this working group? Like what?
I was making sure I was I was connecting that in my head because, yeah, I'm on the newer side of contributor.
Do you, Matt B, see value in trying to get this type of information to help in the development of metrics? Like, does this help in the path for you all?
This conversation is exceptionally fascinating and informative. Just because we're really kind of stress testing like our own comprehension of we've got a working group around value. Do we even know what that means? We do have to have those kind of honest conversations with ourselves. I will say maybe not because of its validity, but because of its effectiveness. I still tend to think of how are people in developer communities, or particularly DevRel organizations and in OSPO organizations, how are they communicating their business value to some leadership? And while I am the very first to admit a lot of what I have done to do so is complete bullshit. It's just it's argument by analogy. You value page views in this organization, and while that's not our primary value over here, I'm going to make an analogous argument for all this open source activities getting significant page views, and you have a calculation of value over there. Let me make an argument that we are equivalently valuable or relatively valuable.
I wouldn't call that bullshit. I would call that trying to put context that your audience understands around something that they don't understand in order to explain it.
Yeah.
And maybe that is the nature of bullshit, but I think I think that's what you're trying to do. I don't think you're trying to mislead anyone. I think the goal is that they don't understand. You're putting it in the context they do.
Yeah, my heart of hearts hopes that we can collect a standard library of metrics that people have used to successfully justify really effective community work. And I don't want that to be limited to use scientific rigor. I would love to drive that conversation towards more rigorous activities and be informed by that. But I'm open to all ways in which people have justified their work and been able to track that day over day, quarter over quarter, and keep getting funded.
Right on. That makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense to me too.
Cool.
Can I come back to measuring innovation for just 1 second?
Absolutely.
So I have a doc student who did a study on some census level data, and so I've familiarized myself a little bit with how innovation can be evaluated. The standard way is patents. It's not super helpful always, especially in open source. But another way that seems to be pretty common is how many new products, software products, are being generated and how many are being taken out of the market. In other words, and they call that product reallocation. And I'm wondering if, Lawrence, you've looked at trying to measure product reallocation in a software market as a signal of innovation.
I have not looked at that exactly. What I've looked at, not survey wise, but in terms of literature review wise, is looking different project velocity metrics. I know you have that there. And basically, if you're looking at release cycles, is that helping in terms of innovation?
Yeah, is it active? Yeah.
And basically, are you basically making updates to the product all the time? So one way that people you look at at developer productivity or innovation is how often are websites being updated, like the product pages of the websites being updated, and that's quantifiable because you can have spiders and bots going back and checking the product pages for changes. So that's a way to measure innovation. I mean, it's also measuring marketing, changing marketing words, but yeah, that's a rough estimate. And I have not seen that. I've considered doing that as a methodology. I decided not to spend the money on the software to do that.
Yeah, no, it's not. I mean, it's easier to do with consumer products because you can get Nielsen data that tells you exactly what those numbers are. Software seems harder to measure.
But if you're looking at it in terms of open source projects, and there's releases, there's versions, there's integrations, all those things are measures. I don't know if I would have them as measures of value though.
Yeah,
I look at those as measures of integrations as
health,
adoption.
sustainability. They're still active. They're activity indicators, which are positive to have. But they indicate cause to continue investing at least, right? But they don't necessarily indicate value.
So in terms of value, it's the classic thought process of there's the cost savings versus the revenue generating.
Right.
And with maybe quality being the third edge of that triangle. I mean, so if you guys have metrics that cover quality of a product, the revenue that it could possibly generate, and the cost savings, that should be those are the main value categories, I think. And it's in terms of audiences, there's a business executive audience and the software engineering audience, which have different. The business executives will also care about risk and things like that. But I know you have a different category for risk, different working group for risk.
Yeah, but are you saying there's kind of like a bimodal separation when you think about those two audiences? Like the two shall meet when it comes to definitions of things like value?
They can agree that everyone will agree that security is very important, and but what's going to make people make a decision or take an action?
Oh yeah, like their definitions of like what it means to feel good about the security of it will differ based on that perspective. Hold on. Huh. That aligns pretty well with, I've got a proposal for focus groups for value, and I'm trying to think of like this internal external split, but maybe the audience, it really comes down to audience. Like, am I perceiving this as a software engineer to be valuable, and can I then communicate that in a business context I think of it like raw things that will add up to part of a narrative that I'm trying to build versus things that are just immediately perceived as valuable to a business executive. Like, go for it.
Here's a specific question that's very wordy question to do for next week. Just focusing on application security, how essential is application and management and or DevOps performance to be measured, at least in part, on the percentage of software component dependencies that are out of date. So basically, everyone says that having up to date dependencies is important, but is anyone actually measuring it?
Yeah.
How are the people and software engineers and their engineering managers can measure that type of thing? And I have to fix the wording on that question, but like basically it's what's metrics are being used to measure performance at on a low level, on a certain granular level, and that's performance versus value. But basically, if you're, I guess at a high level, you're really just looking at what value are you getting per FT of investment, right? I mean, have you been looking at everything in terms of full-time equivalents?
Oh, interesting. I mean, Matt G and team is like full-time equivalents your understanding of head count? Or is that what you're saying, Lawrence? Yeah.
Yes. And yeah, basically the full-time equivalents in the hiring part, and
yeah.
But that's a lot of the full-time equivalent stuff. It's the people who care about that are people in the software and technology business.
Mm-hmm.
The people who work at the 80% of companies that don't create software products or cloud services or things like that are not going to have enough developers on staff where they're thinking about, oh, we're saving a person or two or three or four, and that's really good in terms of Vinod. I think, I don't know if he's still here. Oh yes,
yep.
Vinod. Is in terms of how many projects are you maintaining? How many projects are you relying on? Those are the numbers are dramatically different based off if you're a software company or not, or if you're a large software company or not.
Like that calculation is done differently depending on your vertical?
It matters more. You're not gonna like if you're Google and you have 1,000 developers, you care about one thing. If you are Procter and Gamble and have 50 developers spread out over, or 100 developers spread out over 30 divisions, you're not really thinking about what value you're getting from open source as much. You're more, that's not your core business.
Oh, yeah. So it's not as powerful as like a value metric. Like almost have a delusion.
Like those companies that are managing large software teams are much more likely to be looking at quality metrics and looking at using like AI tools to help improve coding and things like that, and doing reviews of whatever of people's work in a systematic way.
Got you. Okay. Interesting point.
So I just want to point out that we have 2 minutes left in this meeting, and this has been a really amazing conversation. So I just wanted to thank everyone who has asked questions, chimed in, shared experience. And Lawrence, thank you for joining us today.
Yeah,
we still have
super
2 minutes
interesting.
to round up and have any closing thoughts.
Vinod, I think this was really like your meeting in my mind. Is there anything that comes to mind for you to bring us toward a close?
So I got a good idea, like looking at the questions that are more valuable and rethinking of it in terms of that was like really helpful.
Excellent. And, I've done a good bit of opening up issues and starting to prime like where we could go before this meeting. And I'm completely okay with picking this up in 2 weeks. If any of you have interest in what's been had and want to have like more one-on-one or a small group conversation in the meantime, please reach out. I'm happy to set up time next week. And, Sean in particular, if I could, kind of related to this, and Jason on Augur, I'd love to get on your calendar if that's cool.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Let's talk.
Yeah, thank you all. This is really, really fascinating, and feel like I'm having that feeling where your brain feels bigger, but your head isn't big enough to hold it. I'm like trying to figure out what to take away from this.
Vinod, can you email me the questions or show me a link so I could comment up on a few things?
Yeah. Yes. I'll send you the email.
Absolutely awesome. Good. All right. Well, I've got another meeting coming up, so I'm gonna drop. But thank you all, Sean. I'll shoot you an email soon, and
All right.
have a good rest of your week, all. Take
Yeah,
care.
likewise. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. I'm also gonna stop
Okay,
the recording.
I'll get out. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks for joining.